to enlighten us. Today I'm most delighted to have the pleasure of inviting him back to talk about Russia, and then Russia as a host of APEC this year. It's quite a mystery for us because last year when the U.S. hosted the APEC meeting, is a country that we are generally speaking more familiar with. So today we are most honored to have Dr. NALAPAT, Professor of Geopolitics in Manipur University, also Editor-in-Chief in India's Sunday Guardian newspaper, to come here and enlighten us. He actually just returned back from Syria, also a hot spot of global contention with very different approach, by U.S. vis-a-vis Russia and China. So today I'm most delighted that he agreed to it and then come to enlighten our fellow researchers on the topic. So Dr. NALAPAT, welcome.
Thank you. You know, I think the good idea if we make this an interactive session. So I'm quite certain that you may have perspectives on Russia that we don't have back in India. So I think the more interactive it is, the better. So please do feel free to charge in and let's have a dialogue going rather than a kind of a monologue or a speech or whatever. I mean, I think what I've been requested to do by the director is Russia's role in Asia. And for that, I mean, so far as India is concerned, of course, we've had long-standing ties with Russia, mainly in the 1950s, for the simple reason that we have been a partner of the Soviet Union for quite a long time. Unlike Taiwan, which has been a partner of the United States, India has been a partner of was a partner of the USSR for a very long time. And there has not really been very, very fundamental changes in Russia post-1992, in the sense that a lot of the basic structures and systems which were there pre-1992 continue even to the present day. So there have been extensive linkages between the Russian nomenclatura and India, and these linkages have evolved over time. So I just 2 or 3 points I think about Russia. One is, of course, that Russia is half of Asia. I mean, the land area of Russia is half of Asia. It's also half of Europe. So the reality is it's neither in Asia nor in Europe. Russia is in fact the odd man out in Asia and is the odd man out in Europe. Coming to European Russia, I mean, especially post-1992 and actually Gorbachev, from the time Gorbachev became the leader of Russia in the mid-1980s, the perception has been in Moscow that Russia is a European country and that it has to integrate into Europe. If you remember, Gorbachev said that our common European home. I mean, he spoke very often of a common European home. And there was a neglect of Asia and a very high concentration of attention on Europe. Now, I mean, at that point in time, and from that point in time, I haven't changed my view. I have been very clear that Russia will never be accepted into Europe. And the reason is that you have got France and Germany. This Franco-German condominium basically is the decisive pivot of Europe. Even after the expansion of the European Union, it is still France and Germany together that are the pivot of continental Europe. Now, what would happen to France and Germany if Russia were to become an integrated part of Europe? They would be completely marginalized by Russia. Russia would over time become the new pivot of Europe. Now, we have seen, for example, the UN Security Council, in which the members are refusing to surrender their veto powers. They are refusing to admit new members, and they certainly will not admit new members with veto power, because they want to hang on to what they have got. My own view has always been, from the mid-80s, Gorbachev's push to Europe, that France and Germany will keep Russia out of Europe. That it is a foolish dream on the part of people in Moscow that they can be integrated into Europe. That Europe will, of course, pretend to be friendly with them, they will deal with them, etc. But they will always keep them at arm's length. And they will never allow them to become an integral part of the European family. for the simple reason this will completely marginalize France and Germany, and neither of these two countries would like to see that happen. So in Europe, personally, I do not think Russia has got much of a role. It will always be an outsider. In the case of Asia, you have a country which calls itself European and which controls half the Asian landmass. If you look at Russian media, if you look at Russian books, if you look at, Russian internet chatter, you find a lot of very negative perceptions about Asia. In the internet chatter, I would say frankly that a lot of us study very advanced books in the libraries, we read books by scholars. I think we should pay more attention to internet chatter, especially in Russian or Korean or Chinese or languages like that, because that gives a very much a better understanding of public moods and popular moods than many scholarly studies. The chatter is very negative usually about Asia. Asians are seen as dangerous, as primitive, as destructive, and especially the biggest neighbor of Russia, which is China. There's an amazing amount of internet chatter in Russia about China, and almost all of it is very negative. Why I'm saying that is that it's very interesting to note that in Russia, the elite chatter may be friendly to China, because the Russian elite today is a little disappointed with Europe, and they may be talking about China and Russia coming together, perhaps India, China and Russia coming together. But if you look at the non-elite segments of the population, that is the population that's not highly advanced in terms of education, in terms of income, they are extremely negative towards Asia. And there's a lot of misperceptions about this continent, a lot of fear of being taken over by Asia, Asian hordes coming and invading, the soil of Russia, which includes Siberia, the yellow horde. Very racist comments are very common on the thing. So clearly you have a country where the bulk of the population is definitely not positive towards Asia. So that is, an important thing that we have to keep in mind regarding Russia. It's in a sense a nowhere country. It's not in Europe, it's not in Asia, but it's big enough to stand by itself. The question is, of course, will it stand by itself? And for that we have to go into the history of Russia. We go into the history of the Soviet Union, we go into all that, but we can go into a lot of things, but I think it will be more instructive to go into the period after Gorbachev. Because the period after Gorbachev was a period in which Khrushchev began the process of trying to be friendly with the West. Khrushchev had said one thing and did another. He was very aggressive in his language, but he was very conciliatory in his actions. Whether it's the Cuban Missile Crisis or any other goal, Khrushchev was very conciliatory. Brezhnev followed the same line. Some little less aggressive than Khrushchev, but challenging the West in language, but in a sense being very, very accommodative of the West in practice. You will find that there has really not been any challenge to Western domination to Western Europe, for example. For at least 30 years, Russia could have easily gone into Western Europe and won a conventional war there. Now, it's a matter of probability whether there would have been a nuclear conflict if there had been invasion. The reality is that even the United States would be very, very hesitant to go in for nuclear confrontation, even if Russia goes into Europe, for the simple reason of massive retaliation. So given that, Russian forces were in a position of dominance in Europe, but they never utilized that position. They were in a position of dominance in Afghanistan. In the case of Afghanistan, the problem was the supply links from Pakistan. So long as the supply links from Pakistan were there, the Mujahideen were able to hold the Russian army. Had there been a blockade of the supply links in Pakistan, had there been a bombing of, let us say, Peshawar, the entire Afghan operation would have been totally different and Russia would not have lost the war. But they did not have, if I may say so, the strategic courage to go into Pakistan and attack Pakistan. So you find in the Russian case, as distinct from the American case, a certain amount of cowardice. And cowardice is a policy which you normally associate with bureaucracies. Then you have a bureaucratic structure emerging. Now, you can say that the bureaucratic structure has emerged. The Leninist party, Stalinist party was bureaucratic, yes. But the leadership was not bureaucratic. Stalin was not a bureaucrat. Lenin was not a bureaucrat. These were revolutionaries, these were ideologues, and they created a bureaucracy, but they led that bureaucracy. Even Khrushchev was, in a sense, was semi-revolutionary, but very, very semi. By the time Brezhnev came to power, it was totally bureaucratic. It was totally bureaucratized. And the result is very clear in the responses, in the reactions of Russia, of the Soviet Union at that point in time. Let's use the word Russia interchangeably. Let's, instead of going and getting confused about Soviet Union and Russia. So it's a very different kind of responses that you have when you have bureaucratized structure. Now, why this is important is when we track the Chinese Communist Party and you track the development of leadership in the Chinese Communist Party, is it that the Chinese Communist Party is also, in a sense, becoming bureaucratized? That the higher echelons are becoming, in a sense, bureaucrats coming to power and taking the top of the party? Is it that you're going to have a Brezhnevite kind of chemistry in the Chinese Communist Party? Now, you had Deng Xiaoping